Hello. All right, thank you all for coming. At the top there, I have a file that you can download. It is a sort of just like a little static site based off of HTML5 boilerplate, just so you have something to work with. There's some examples in there, a little like utility tool that I made to toggle CSS classes, and if you don't have a local install of Drupal easily available, it's a really quick way to just mess around with Modernizr, because you kind of have to like know how Modernizr works before really looking at the Drupal integration side of it. So whether you have Drupal installed locally or you download this, and hopefully I think it'll work for you. It's just like a URL shortener service that I hooked it into. Will get you using Modernizr by the end, or perhaps within minutes. So does anyone need that URL up there any longer? It works? Yeah, it's bit.do. Yeah, I don't know what it is, but they let me do like a custom URL. So that's why I used it. It just links to my Dropbox. Alrighty. So, let me introduce myself. My name is Chad Evans. I just moved to Asheville from Austin. I still work for a company in Austin named RxWiki. We're doing a sort of crowdsourced pharmacist written medication database type of website, and it uses Drupal. So that's been a lot of fun. We use Modernizr for a few things, and actually just recently we used it for like a really weird scenario that I wouldn't have expected Modernizr to be good for, and someone else thought of it, and I was like, yeah, let's use it for that. So anyway, so personally I found out about Modernizr like many years ago, and I've tried to use it on every project ever since, because having it available kind of like gets you through tough spots. You might be in a situation where you're like, I need this. This works great on these browsers, doesn't work in these other ones. Like, how do I get through this? And Modernizr pretty much will always be there for you. I ended up in Drupal 8, which is usually a sign that a library is mature and useful. And I'll get into why it's going to be a little more challenging to work with in Drupal 8, even though it's already in there. We'll talk about that later. So anyway, the first time I installed Modernizr, I thought because of the name that it would like make IE 8 and 7 or whatever I was working with have all the latest features and stuff. And I just installed it, and I'm like, why isn't this making IE 8 do all the stuff I want it to do? Then I realized that all it does is give you results of tests, feature tests, and then you decide sort of what you want to do with that through JavaScript and CSS. So on its own, doesn't do anything but runs tests on page load. And the reason to use it is because, well, yeah, HTML5 and CSS3 have all this cool stuff, and you want to use it, but you know, I will gleefully ignore some older browsers on maybe my own sites or something, but then, you know, I'm working for someone, they want it to be compatible with IE 8, IE 7. It's not just IE either. There's all sorts of new features that maybe are native on WebKit, but they're not on Firefox yet or something. And so you want to use a native implementation of it, so you use the native HTML5 or CSS3 version, and then you want to create a fallback, either trying to recreate that feature in the other browser or some kind of alternative style or functionality. And so going forward, like the use cases of Modernizr change. Like maybe a few years ago, like everyone used it for SVG because you know, IE 6, 7, 8 don't have SVG support. These days, it's just IE 8 you have to worry about, and some people don't care about IE 8. So way back in the old days, it was kind of easy. You could say, if you're Firefox, you know, or you know, you have all your styles, and then you say, if you're IE 7 or whatever, you put in some CSS hack or something to try to make something work. But as there's like a zillion different combinations these days of devices and browsers and everything, it doesn't make sense anymore to do that. User agent strings are all crazy, and you can spend all day trying to parse them, and they still don't mean anything. I don't even know what that is. So, and all I want to know is whether the device supports SVG or not. So Modernizr gives you something that simple. It's like you run this SVG test, Modernizr returns true. And it gives you a CSS class to work with, and this JavaScript object that says true for Modernizr.svg. And so it's super simple, like Boolean type of true-false stuff per test. All right, so how does it work? Their website is simple, but it has everything. You go to modernizr.com, they have documentation, download, custom download builder, all this stuff. But basically, it's a JavaScript library you run at the top of your page, unless you're like a super performance freak, and you can put it at the bottom, but then you have to make sure that everything, all the JS that references that object is going to be below that, and that you don't care about CSS like flash of unstyled styles. But generally, you can start your page like this. Your class is just no JS. So that means if the JS does not run, that still exists there in your DOM, and you can put CSS styles towards that. You could even put in a message that says like you should use JavaScript in CSS and have it appear at the top or something. But generally, when I'm developing a site, I like to turn JS off every once in a while and see like if the site's totally broken and try to make it work with that. Because a lot of people put in script blockers. They're like, hey, my friend told me to use this script blocker, so I'm using it, and it's nice to make the site work without JavaScript. You can always use that. But as soon as Modernizr runs, it replaces that with JS, because Modernizr ran, it's JavaScript, so you have JS on. And then, for example, in Drupal 8 here, the only tests that Drupal 8 has is a touch test for touch events, SVG, and this HTML5 details element, which is sort of like the native implementation of those like drop-down field sets, collapsible field sets that Drupal loves to use all over the admin UI, and I think WebKit supports it and Firefox doesn't. So Drupal 8 has pledged full HTML5 support, and so they want to use certain features like that. Yeah, so this is the result of on a Mac desktop, because there's no touch capabilities, but it does support SVG, details, and JS. If it was Firefox, it would say no details, and then you can work with that CSS class. But it all comes from this JavaScript object that gets created when Modernizr runs. Touch is false, and then it inserts no touch up into the HTML element. Now, when you first download Modernizr, you have generally the development version, which has essentially every test. There's a lot of websites that just use the development version, and they never bother to do a custom build with just a couple tests that they need, because, well, I guess it's lazy, and Modernizr is pretty fast anyway, and some people just don't care about having every test even if they're not using it. Don't do that, because it's really obvious. As soon as you open up Chrome Inspector or something, you see like this huge chunk of tests if someone's looking at your site, and then they know that you're lazy and you still have the development version of Modernizr in there. All right, so these are just some ideas about some things you can do with having these classes be different on these different devices. I'm sure everyone's been there where they're on a site that's not really a responsive site, and then you zoom in on a phone and like the fixed header gets all huge and like weirdly placed, and like it's all in your face and it looks horrible. This would fix that. You basically say, if you have a touch screen, you can use media queries too to make sure that it's below a certain size, then you're going to reset the header back to position static, which is the default positioning of anything in CSS, unless you change it to fixed, absolute, or relative. SVG, again, like I remember there was some survey that asked people what they use Modernizr for, and like 90% of people used it for SVG. So it's like, this is what people use for SVG support. And but I want to mention that what I have up here is probably not the best way to do it, because if Modernizr doesn't run, you're not going to get either one of those, because they're both specific to SVG or no SVG, and Modernizr is going to be injecting both of those styles into there. So in fact, probably the best way to do it is to not have SVG on the top one. So your main style is, icon.svg, and then in the case where the browser doesn't support it, you have the no SVG class up top, and then it uses the other one instead. I mean, this one's easier to look at. You can say like, oh, that one's yes, this one's no, but looking for like maximum compatibility, which is sort of what Modernizr provides, you may want to do it the second way I described it. But you may not always want to put SVG in CSS. Sometimes you want it inline like this. And so in this case, you have it inline, and then you run a script that basically says, hey, if Modernizr, if this browser does not support SVG, then replace that source image with the PNG. So like, obviously this is really simplified code right here, but it really kind of is that simple. There's smarter ways to do it, but if you want to embed it like that, you can just rewrite it on the browsers that don't support it. This is what I was talking about before. This is also the Drupal 8 stuff. So these are just examples using the tests that are included in Drupal 8. I'll go into how you can use like many of the probably like 100 plus tests. In this case, that code in the bottom is sort of what's on the top there. You see that the first details element is not open, and the second one is. And again, HTML5, not many people know about this, but this element exists, and it's really super simple. You don't need any jQuery or anything like that to open and close these fields. But if you don't support that, then you need to use something like this, where if the browser doesn't support details element, then you just need some kind of script in there where that opens and closes it when you click on it. And what's cool about this is that eventually, when Firefox supports that element, this feature, it'll just work using the native implementation. So you sort of like, you cover anytime you want to use a feature, you sort of like do the native implementation, you figure out your fallback and however which way you want it, and then you just know that it's going to work for years to come. All right, like one of the biggest questions when people ask, it's like, this must be like some huge library or whatever, but it's really tiny. Like especially in Drupal 8, it's only less than 2 kilobytes gzipped. I guess it's supposed to be a capital KB. And it runs super fast. They say that it runs in microseconds. Like, I guess that's 1,000th of a millisecond. I'm not really sure. It's super fast. So there's a really cool thread on Drupal.org that I found like sort of after the conversation that had happened, and it was about sort of how this got into Drupal 8 and what the reasoning was behind it. And basically people were just like, you can't do modern web design without feature detection, and Drupal is supporting HTML5, all this stuff, we need it in there. So it's in there. It's a really small build. Again, it only has like four tests in it. And then if you want to have more tests, you have to use a module, and I'll go into that. So generally there's 4 resources that will get you there. And of course, then the first one is modernizr.com. And once this presentation, just trying to give you sort of like the overview of it, and then I'll show you how to do all these things, and then I'll make sure that you know how to do it. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff here: documentation, news. There's this downloader. This is an example of like the development build, because everything is checked. Like these are all tests. CSS3, font face. Like, yeah, all browsers have font face, but maybe you don't think that a certain font like works very well in a certain browser, or you don't want font face in IE7. Like you can use that. Like background size. One by one, all these cool things you can test for if your website requires it. So you check what you need, generate it, you download it, and then you have your custom build. Jim touched on this in the last session, this website Can I Use is awesome, and they just had a visual makeover. It looks great. You go in there and you can see very clearly defined graph, I suppose, of what browser supports what, even looking into the future, into what is planned. So you want to use a certain thing, you go in there and you say, oh well, IE 11 is the first one using it, and it's an evergreen browser now, it's always updated, like, okay, I don't care, and I'm just going to leave those other ones, maybe no one will notice. Or you could say, all right, well, IE 8, 9, 10, like, all right, that's significant enough, I'm going to come up with some kind of fallback, and maybe I don't care about Opera Mini. But this is a really good resource, and I think Modernizr 3.0 has some kind of like built-in check with Can I Use. On GitHub, this is useful. You can see what's been updated. They have a wiki on there with all sorts of information about like what polyfill libraries you can use if you need feature parity and a browser doesn't support a certain feature. Then the Modernizr module, and I'll show you what kind of cool integration it has with Drupal. Okay, so a lot of people don't use it, but Modernizr superpower truly is this thing called Modernizr load, which you can get very far with Modernizr just using it for CSS. The browser supports this feature, doesn't support this feature. Here are my styles for each scenario. But Modernizr load lets you take it to the next level and be much more performant by tying your specific CSS and JavaScript files to a feature test. So if a feature exists, you can load a certain file. Like let's say you test for touch. The device has touch. Then you load your touch events library and initialize it, and you don't have to have that script loaded on every other device that doesn't have touch. And so that's just one small example, but if you do that maybe in 10 scenarios in the same site, like you've made that site a lot leaner on these different browsers, especially as the capabilities grow. So it has this thing called yep nope in it. It looks like pseudocode, but it's not. In this case, we're testing for geolocation, and there's a way to do this in the Drupal.info file too, which I'll show you. It's really cool. It'll write this for you. In this case, you're testing for geolocation. If geolocation is not true, then you load this other file. And perhaps whatever app you have just uses like the same API, and this one simulates it on browsers that don't have geolocation. This is sort of like what I was talking about before with touch, where it's like if you have touch, then load these two files, which is a library and maybe my custom events, and then when it's complete, you initialize it. So you can do all sorts of cool stuff like this. You can chain it in all weird different ways. People have loaded jQuery like this. There are sites where they almost load everything through Modernizr because it's asynchronous, super fast, and it doesn't block your page. And again, integrates into Drupal really well. And I'll show you how to do that. So what I like about fallbacks is that I guess back in the day, you always had to try to make everything exactly the same across all browsers. Like, this browser doesn't have border radius. You have to load some library that does some like insane hack that adds all this weight to the browser to do like a border radius. Well, luckily people don't care as much about that kind of stuff anymore, and you can get creative with it. Like, for example, let's say your designer says, I have this pink or whatever color modal window on a pink background. And if you don't have box shadow, it looks really bad. So what do? Do you try to put in some kind of library that will create that box shadow, or do some CSS hack? Like, okay, maybe if you want to spend a bunch of time on it and like add a bunch of weight to it, or you can do something like this. If you don't have box shadow, you have an alternative style, and it's like IE8, for example, is great at doing nice borders like that. So just use it. And in this case, it would just look like this. So there's the modal, you've got your box shadow, and Modernizr has run, said that the browser doesn't have box shadow. Use this to be specific and say the border, it's going to ignore the box shadow one because it doesn't support it, and instead it's going to give it that border. But a browser that has box shadow is not going to show it like that. So, all right. thank you for being patient with that. Let's actually work with it. So if you have either Modernizr installed with Drupal, I'll show you how to do that, but I'm going to look at this one first, which is basically this little Modernizr playground. See if I can get to it from here. All right, I believe I have it here. Okay. You'll see that. Guess I can make it bigger. So I have a bunch of links in here because these are some very useful resources. The bottom link, Modernizr and Masterclass, is one that, like, when I was learning about Modernizr or when I was reviewing it, I just found that article, and this guy explains it super clearly. So if you forget anything that I might have said, this one has all sorts of information. Anyway, what I did in here was create something where down in this box, it'll print out every test that Modernizr is doing. And if you click them, it will switch the CSS class to the opposite, so you can kind of mess with it. Like, for example, if I click this JS right here, it'll change it to Node.js, and I have some CSS that fixes this up to the top. That just looks like. Hold on, let me find it. Right here. So Node.js body before content, you should really turn on JavaScript. You can steal that from me if you want. I thought that was like a really cute idea. So if you look at the source, all this is doing is, okay, so here are all the tests that Modernizr's run on this development version. And you can see that by clicking that, all it did was change the class name. It's actually at the end of it right now. I don't know if you can see it, but it didn't actually change the Modernizr object. So this is like not really for script, but it's fun for CSS stuff. For example, all right, we have this SVG, big, beautiful SVG. Wow, look at that. No matter how close you get, still looks perfect because it's not an image, it's a bunch of shapes. The browser knows how to render it. And the code that I have says, I have it right here. So normally, I have some base styles here, just for, width, height, whatever. And then here is just, using Modernizr to specify which resource I want to use. And if I find SVG here, you can see it should change to some kind of horrible pixelated thing because it's switching out to, an image. So if I were to, look at the source of that over here, you can see, hopefully you can see, right here, it's crown.png. But of course, if I click this and switch that class back to SVG, now it's going to say crown.svg. So really simple like that. It's a lot of fun to use. And then one really cool thing that not a lot of people know about yet is inline SVG, where it doesn't call on an external resource. The actual SVG information is directly inline in HTML, and it's super easy. You can pull it out of, you can open up an SVG file in a text editor and literally get the code and drop it into HTML. And I'm not exactly sure what the support is, so I'll check. Let's see, inline SVG in HTML5. All right, looks like it's just IE8 again, but a lot of people actually do still use that. It comes installed with Windows 7, which I'm pretty sure is still the most popular Windows. So generally, like me personally, if something, I try to make everything work in IE8. I don't care about anything below that. So let's go back. In this case, it's kind of a different approach because what I do is, this is the inline SVG right here. If we look at the code, you can see it looks all crazy. It's all these polygons with fills and points and stuff like that. I don't know what these are. I just pasted these in here. It's a div called SVG fallback. By default, you hide it. But if the test result is no inline SVG, you show it, and there it is. So it would never show up as two of them. It would either be one or the other. So you're not going to get that fancy stuff, but if you really want to, I'm sure you can do something with weird image maps in JavaScript or something. So there's that. There's kind of a fun CSS feature that no one really uses, but I think it's really cool. Border image. Again, I don't remember the. Let's see, border image. All right, see this one. If you're going to use, you definitely want. Interesting. All right. So in this border image situation, good luck trying to hack in this border image to a browser that doesn't have it. So in my opinion, this is something where you just get a simple fallback, where is it? There it is, border image. Ta-da! Super simple. Does the same job. And the code is very simple. Here's my code for the support of border image, and then never mind. Yeah, here it is. Border image. Here's the stuff. No border image. None of that, and just some background color. That's it. So a lot of times you can make these things work with something super simple. And if you wanted to try to hack that and make it look right, you can do all sorts of stuff in here with the no border image property and make that work. All right, but here's where it starts getting really cool. So this is Flex Slider, which is a really nice responsive slider. And it's very simple. I literally put this together in maybe 5 or 8 minutes. It's so simple to install. This Drupal module, all the stuff. But when you initialize it, it has a bunch of options. And so you initialize it in this window.load, whatever your Flex Slider div is, and then they have a whole API on their website as to how you can use it. And so generally each one of these options, you have some value. But one of the coolest things that I love to do with Modernizr is use it in right in the middle of one of these jQuery libraries where you set your options. This is a ternary operator, I guess they call it, and you're basically saying if Modernizr touch is true, then true. Make touch controls true when you load this, and then if not, false. And so basically the idea here is that whether the device has touch capabilities or not, it has a whole different set of features within this slider. So if you have touch, slide it back and forth, but if not, fade it in and out, and that's what we have right here. So I'll show you a cool trick if you don't know it. You can go to Chrome://flags, and in here, you can turn on touch events, so you can mess with this stuff. So I can enable it, and then I guess it'll relaunch and hopefully reload all that stuff. And if I go back to this playground, if I go here, you'll see it looks different now. It doesn't have the little circles that are probably impossible to touch on touch, and it slides in, in a way that sort of implies you can work it with your thumb. And so take it to the next level. In Chrome, you can emulate one of these other devices. I think it's here, emulation. Yeah, let's pretend we're an iPad. And I guess I'll try to reload it. OK, so, oops. As long as the inspector is open, I can do this. So now this simulates some kind of finger nub. And as you can see, all of a sudden, this rotator became totally touch enabled with the styles that we wanted, simply because we used that Modernizr test to then make our choices within Flex Slider's options. So that's a really cool trick that I don't know if a lot of people know about, but it is very useful for using this same library and have it work differently on different devices. So let me try to close this. All right, there we go. Will that do it? No. like super low resolution. Here we go, reset. All right. So anyway, the whole purpose of this little file right here is so you can access any one of these tests. You can add stuff to HTML if you want to, CSS, JavaScript, whatever. I have a few like challenges here at the bottom. And if we have time, maybe we can try to figure those out together. Because honestly, I don't think I've even done those, at least recently. Let me show you some of these different resources that you're going to want to look at. Like, for example, the Modernizr website. Documentation is just one massive page with like everything that you need. You can go on here, search. You can go on here and use this table of contents, like whatever. Generally, you go to download, and it's not going to have anything checked off for you. But then if you click here for development version, okay, you can just like download that one specifically. But from the home page, if you click development, it says uncompressed 42 kilobits, I guess. It brings you to this one with all this stuff checked off. And then you can just look at the code, like what it is right here. And it's already been generated here, so you would just download it. And what's cool with Modernizr is that every time you make one of these custom builds with the tests that you want, they appear at the top of the document. So I guess I can click this one again, and you can see that, well, this one doesn't look like it has it. Why is it not there? Well, I don't know why, but that development version at the top right there, don't use that one because it doesn't show you what you have. If you download this one down here, right at the top as a link, it'll show you what's in there. So basically, if you have, like for example, I have a version of Drupal 8 right here. And in Drupal 8, if I look at the Modernizr file, if I find it in here, we can look at it. And it's a little confusing because the name of my local site is Modernizr. So let me just do like modernizr.min.js. Yeah. OK, so here it is. So if I'm to go to this, I'll put it in Sublime Text. Oops. So this is like the Modernizr file that's in Drupal 8. But right at the top of it, you'll notice there is a link. And you can just grab that link and go to modernizr.com. And it will be sort of pre-filled out. See, there it is. SVGs checked off, touch events, add CSS classes. That gives it the ability to add CSS classes. And so then you can add to it here if you want to. So, all right, let's talk about Drupal and how you can use it in Drupal. First, let me show you this website first. I don't know if you've ever seen this website. It was on like Reddit. It was all over the place because it's like one of the best looking websites I've ever seen. It's just gardenstudio.com.br. It's beautiful. My goodness, look at all this. Actually, it looks a little strange right now because am I zoomed in? Anyway, it's nice, especially if you check it out on your own thing. But I went into the source. I'm like, what are they using on here? And there it is. Their development copy of Modernizr with like all these tests that I guarantee they're not using, because I went through their code and I realized that they're only using modernizr.touch. Like that's it. So they don't care. Obviously, when you load this website, there's like a spinner and stuff like that. But if you want a fast site, like don't do that. Let's see. So in Drupal 7, that's where we'd be working with Modernizr right now. There's a module, and you get it at drupal.org/project/Modernizr. And generally, you're going to want to have the libraries API installed first, and then the Modernizr library just lives at sitesall libraries modernizr modernizr.min.js. And what's really cool is that from within within Drupal, you can go to development, or go to Modernizr settings. Then in here, it'll say, hey, you don't have Modernizr installed. Like, you need to make one. So the way this module works is that other modules and themes in Drupal can request certain tests. Like, these ones right here are being requested literally by the Modernizr module itself. The Modernizr is saying, hey, I need Modernizr load, I need this print shiv, which is like HTML5 shiv, so that IE 8 and below know how to use HTML5 elements, and CSS classes, which is what allows it to inject it into the HTML. So right now that it's requesting that, and I don't even have a custom build. But let me show you something cool. So there's certain modules that will request certain tests so you can work with them more easily. Like I put one in here called geolocation. And there's a geolocation HTML5, and it's going to use the HTML5 geolocation API. It's this simple. Basically, in the geolocation HTML5 module is this. It just says, it's basically saying, hey, I request the geolocation test. Like, that's it. So if you're writing a module, you can incorporate Modernizr by putting in something like this. But we actually need a lot more than this because, well, we don't even have a Modernizr build right now. Like, there's no file in there. This is just saying these items are requesting it. But what's cool is that you can do it through your .info file as well. So here's my .info file for that theme. And let's say I want the background size test, and I want the touch test. You can do it right from here and not mess with any code. And then let me see if I need to clear the caches. Nope, there they are. So notice that I wanted background size, and then notice I wanted touch. Now we're getting somewhere. Now, like, I know that my modules and my themes are like looking for these specific tests. So you can literally just click the button for download your Modernizr production build. And honestly, I like to do it this way because you can get that big old development version, and like there's a zillion things in there you don't need. What I like to do is, like, as I need a feature, I like add it to the .info file, and then I download a new Modernizr build. It's sort of like, instead of starting all big and fat and like slimming it down, you start with nothing and you sort of like build it up as you need it. So you can just click right here. Everything's already checked off for you. You notice it's in the URL, so you could send this to a friend and say, hey, look at my awesome Modernizr custom build. It's my favorite one. Here you go. And then they come right to this page. And from here, luckily with Drupal you don't need to minify, because Drupal will do it for you, so you don't have to minify, but you can. You can preview it right here, I suppose. So let's say don't minify, because maybe we want to look at it. We know Drupal's going to minify it, so we'll regenerate it, download it, and it's always going to name it some weird name, Modernizr custom, blah, 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 blah. You have to change that. There's instructions on Drupal.org. Modernizr module. And I don't actually know if you do, but it's recommended that you change it to modernizr.min.js. That's just like what you're supposed to do. Now I think I have, so then on your site, you have sites, all libraries, Modernizr. This is where that file has to live. So there are some drush commands, but honestly I don't know how to use it. I haven't found any documentation. I think it's like early. So you just drop this in here, modernizr.min.js, and now we go back to our site. Let's flush the caches, see what happens. So every cache cleared, unless we can check down here to see if it actually worked. There it is. Class JS, touch, geolocation, like background size. Like, those are the tests that I need. It's working. If you put the development copy of Modernizr in that folder, this screen will show you everything. Oops, no performance. Modernizr settings. So if you come here, and it's probably a UI issue, and like we probably just need to update the Modernizr module, but these are the tests that are being requested by modules, but it'll also show you any tests that are in that Modernizr JavaScript file. So that's another reason not to start with development, because it'll just be a list of every single test in here. But that's cool too. And you can also do, we were talking about before, Modernizr load, which is basically like, you can do these yep nope things right in the Drupal.info file. You could say, if touch is true, load this touch events thing, and then it will write that JavaScript for you. You can do one with nope there just as easily. if Modernizr touch, box shadow, then, load CSS, box shadow. And then you load up your gigantic, weird code to make IE8 have box shadow, but you haven't bothered any other browser with all that weird code. So I don't know if that's actually going to work. So let me just comment that. But let's see if the other one will work. Generally, anytime you make a .info change, you should flush the caches. There it is. Remember, I enabled touch in Chrome, so that it thinks I have touch enabled right now, and so this file ran, and this file, all it is a alert that says you have touch enabled. So if you look at your console, you can see where that actually happens. So if I load it again, there it is, resource. They have to do some weird hacks a little bit in Modernizr to make it work right. So sometimes things come through with this resource interpreted as image, but transferred as MIME. But I assure you it's fine. All the super web geniuses agree that it's fine. So you can see on there that this file was loaded afterwards because I had the touch test come back as true. Yeah. All right. So I've been through all that stuff. Can I help anyone get this going on your system? Anyone stuck? Whoa, I've taught it perfectly. So everyone knows how to use it. You get it? Okay. Trying to think if there's any other, okay. So here's the issue with Drupal 8. So on Drupal 7 does not have Modernizr built in. So you can use the module as I showed you. You have it in there, you have that little interface, you can use .info, lets modules request certain tests. But you don't actually have to use all that, right? You could have just gone to the .info file and, done something like scripts, and then you just load Modernizr out of your JS folder. You don't have to use all this. And some people prefer not to. I've not done that at times. I've just wanted easy, and I just deal with it in its own little world, and all I do is include it right here. But in Drupal 8, it's a little bit different. Since it's already included, in Drupal 8, you're going to have to use the module because you're not going to want two versions of Modernizr running, and Drupal core already runs Modernizr. So Drupal 8, the module is not there yet, but it will be when Drupal 8 comes out. You will need to use the module, because what the module will do is the same way that this was showing us what the module was requesting and what geolocation was requesting and my custom stuff in my .info file. This interface is going to have the tests that Modernizr core requires, and they'll be hard coded. So basically, when you come in here, you'll see more than you'll see touch, you'll see SVG, you'll see details, and whatever else they want to add to it because it's already there. And then the module will be able to override the built-in Modernizr with your custom one. So it's good to know how the module works, because in Drupal 8 you're going to be using it. Unless you want to do everything manually, which is possible, because the Drupal 8 has this thing called add test, and you can use the Modernizr's own API to manually add tests, and you can do that, but the whole idea with Modernizr is you make things easy for yourself, and then you make things work everywhere, and you make things fast everywhere. And so it's best to perhaps automate as much as you can. And unless there's any questions, I'll end it here.